Welcome to M Talk, brought to you by the M Scale, where we talk all things menstruation. We interview the best and brightest, working across multiple fields, all with the same mission: to make the lives of people who menstruate a little bit easier. Good morning, my name is Annabelle and I am so ecstatic to welcome you to our podcast all about periods. For those who don't know, I'm the founder of the M Scale, which is a menstrual movement to try and remove period anxiety. So for the past 3 years, I've actually been knee deep in the menstrual justice movement, fighting the good fight to remove period stigma and improve access to products. However, before this, I was a film and television exec, so I know a good story when I see one. And having worked alongside these incredible people doing incredible things in the field of menstruation, I thought they deserve a platform and everyone needs to know what's going on behind the scenes. So let's get into it. Good morning, everyone. Today we're talking to Chrissy Cattle from iRise International. iRise is a Sheffield-based charity and global leader in programming, policy and research into menstrual injustice in the UK and around the world. Here are some, and I say some because if I tried to list them all, this introduction would be far too long. It's already quite a long introduction, which shows you the impressive body of work that they've done. But here are some examples of the direct impact their work has contributed to. With their campaign Every Period Counts in 2023, they brought together hundreds of young people and marched on London in the first ever period parade and successfully lobbied the government to address period poverty and improve access to period products and services in schools across the country. They've recently developed a youth-led toilet policy toolkit for schools, advising on best practice to ensure schools and learners can effectively implement the government's period products scheme and help revolutionise school culture for period equity. This was launched with PHS Group, who hold the product contract for England and is now being piloted alongside a menstrual curriculum in schools across England and Wales. Their new annual Red Report has provided critical insight into period poverty and menstrual stigma within the UK, and importantly, what drives and influences it over time. It's been widely reported on in national newspapers and used by a variety of NGOs to further demand change. In East Africa, iRise and their sister organisation iRise Institute East Africa established the Period Equality Network, TPEN, in 2021, which is now a thriving movement of 270 grassroots organisations across the region, pioneering a first-of-its-kind small grant program. And finally, their paper entitled Experiences of Menstruation in High-Income Countries, released in 2021, actually helped me personally decide to embark on my journey of creating the M Scale to help reduce period anxiety and stigma. So I am personally grateful for the work that they do. Today we're talking to Chrissy, who has been the CEO of iRise since April 2025, about the work they do through a wider systemic lens. In 2024, iRise brought together a variety of different movements to co-create Scarlet Memorations, a global grassroots-led report exploring the menstrual justice movement, the progress that's been made, and defining for the first time a menstrual justice framework. So, with all of that, please give a warm welcome to Chrissy. Welcome, Chrissy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
I guess just to begin with, I mean, I feel like, I say this sincerely, I had to cherry pick some of the work that iRise does to put it into the introduction. iRise does so much, and it's such a force for change for people in the UK and around the world. And I guess my first question is to sort of maybe explain to the audience a little bit more about the work that you're doing and how you came to be at iRise personally.
Thank you. Yeah, I quite often describe the organisation as a little bit of a sort of wild beast. It's quite hard to explain kind of all the different areas of work, but I sort of start kind of locally. So we're based in Sheffield, which is a city in the north of the UK, and we host a network of period product banks across the city. So we see this as sort of our entry point to kind of engage people in menstrual justice, period products, and to meet that sort of very real need, which is around sort of period poverty. And once people are engaged, then we can really start talking to them about what really is the root of the issue that we're talking about. It's not just about pads. In the UK, we also have our youth board, which is 13 young activists from across the UK. So these are sort of young people aged 18 to 30 who are driving menstrual justice through their own activism. And we've got young people who run their own charities. We've got young people who use sort of drama, art and creativity to drive menstrual justice. We've got sort of people that are starting out on their journey and people that have been doing this work for a really long time. You mentioned the toolkit. That's a really live piece of work for us, which is really holding the UK government to account in its commitment to period equity. And then, of course, we work in sisterhood with iRise Institute East Africa in Uganda, hosting the Period Equality Network, which is, as you mentioned, is 270 grassroots organisations. And we also mobilise resource for their sort of in-schools programme too. And then the global work is really around what we're going to be talking about today, which is the framing of the menstrual justice movement and moving beyond sort of a simplistic framing of it's about pads, it's about hygiene, to much more of a kind of intersectional rights-based approach. And we're starting on a new body of work now for the next couple of years of taking this on a journey. So this is a really sort of timely conversation to have.
No, absolutely. It's so funny because sometimes when you talk about like period poverty or menstrual justice, people do just think tampons and pads. But as we're going to talk about, it's so much more than that. Before we continue, Chrissy, do you want to just tell us a little bit about how you came to iRise and your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So previously to iRise, I was the foundation manager at a private grant-making foundation, so kind of philanthropy. And previous to that, I worked in small international development charities, so like sort of fundraising and those sort of roles. But it was really when I was in philanthropy that I sort of came to understand about kind of the systemic shift required to sort of meet the justice goals that we collectively need. And I think for me, it was a real learning curve around, okay, well, actually, we need to fundamentally shift how funding flows, how power flows. And in the foundation that I was involved in, we went from, funding kind of missionary-led organisations and very much around sort of personal connections to funding grassroots movement building in Peru and Papua New Guinea. And it was that focus and that approach that I took when I came into iRise 18 months ago now. I've been at the organisation. So I took over from the founders who had been running the organisation for the last 10 years with a remit really of sort of taking it into its next phase. And one of the first pieces of work that I was handed was the Scarlet Memorations report to sort of deliver on that and see that through. And my background isn't in menstrual work or menstrual justice, so it was really a deep dive into the movement, trying to understand its history, where it's at, learning from so many amazing people. So so that was kind of my first big piece of work, and we carry on from there.
And here it is. We will link Scarlet Memorations in the episode notes. And just for people who haven't seen it or haven't had the opportunity to read it, it is 80 pages. So it is a very in-depth report, but it is a riveting read. And the first thing I want to acknowledge is how unbelievably beautiful it is. Normally this stuff doesn't come so beautiful. As someone who sort of reads a lot of these reports, they're normally pretty dry. You'd have to be very passionate about the topic to sort of take any inspiration from it. But Scarlet Memorations is physically and also metaphorically beautiful. So I'm just going to read one excerpt for our listeners, and I'm going to ask you about the significance of it. This is an excerpt from the report itself for those who haven't read it. Like the mesmerizing dance of starlings at dawn and dusk, individuals across the globe are coming together in a powerful synchronized movement to advance menstrual justice, which is very poetic. So can you tell me a bit about the symbolism behind the report, what Scarlet Memorations means and why it was really important to you that it's just stunning. Like, can I frame it and put it on the wall, on my wall? It's so beautiful.
Well, yeah, I mean, we certainly owe its visual beauty and the way it was brought to life to an independent designer called Elena Ekaherdi, who lives in Indonesia. She's a feminist designer. So we had like a bit of budget when we were doing the report for the final design. And it was one of my favourite parts of the process, actually, was putting out that terms of reference and getting sort of portfolios from an incredible array of designers from across the world. We wanted someone based in the global south. We wanted someone that was sort of really aligned with this work. And it was really hard to land on Eleanor, who was extremely patient in the back and forth of getting the report where it needed to be. But they just brought so much to it, brought it to life in, as you agree, such a beautiful way. And because the report was so collective in every single way, I mean, I didn't write any of it. I just sort of stewarded and closely went along with the process and did lots of kind of editing and reading. But the name was actually, it was Arundhati from the Global Menstrual Collective who came up with the name. It had a name before, I think it was called Whispers to Roars, which we loved, which was kind of around no longer will we be whispering in silence about this, we'll be sort of roaring it. But we felt like that didn't really kind of connect with the kind of coming together of movements of individuals, of activists from all over the world. It was Arundhati who suggested perhaps we should think about murmurations, birds, and when they come together, what can be achieved, how beautiful it is when people come together. So that's where it came from. And then that imagery and that visual sort of weaved its way throughout the paper. And it was really Ingrid and Abby, who were the researchers who led the process, who just really ran with that and built it into sort of all aspects. And what resulted is, I agree, a really, really beautiful piece of work that we're really proud of here at iRise.
You should be. We're going to dive a little bit into the report. I've tried to structure this in a way that the people listening will get the most out of the report whilst also keeping to our time. I think one of the first sort of key important messages in the report is sort of, like you said, developing this framework of what menstrual justice means, because I think this term is starting to become more popular. I use it for the work that we do. I know there's also obviously menstrual equity. There's a few different terms thrown around there, but I think it would be really helpful to sort of reiterate what came together in Scarlet Memorations of what does menstrual justice mean.
So I think it's important to say that the report in no way sort of claims to own or invent the term menstrual justice. I think really the report is supposed to be kind of a toolkit for the menstrual justice movement, a framework, or at least the beginnings of a framework or a definition of a framework for movement actors. So as I've sort of mentioned, the report was formed so we sort of hosted it. A foundation funded us to host it alongside the Global Menstrual Collective, and then there was 2 independent researchers alongside an advisory group or a co-creation group, and then a desk review was conducted, and then activists around the world were interviewed, and then case studies were sort of invited from that. And everybody came together to essentially define what a menstrual justice approach could look like. And I think the idea was that there's many frameworks that exist. Period poverty, menstrual equity, menstrual hygiene management. Lots of people use these in lots of different ways in lots of different contexts. But the idea was that a menstrual justice approach, the definition that came up was that it's a rights-based intersectional approach that seeks to dismantle structural inequities related to menstruation and the menstrual cycle. So the report then takes that and comes up with lots of different principles and recommendations for different actors, which we can dive into a little bit more. But essentially it's kind of saying, if we want to do this work, how do we do it? And how does everybody think that we should do it? And here are some examples of where people around the world are already doing this, and this is the impact that it's having.
Okay, that makes sense. That it's quite a broad term is what you're saying, and it's captured quite a lot, which is in the report. Mm-hmm. I think first thing, if we're looking at menstrual justice, is the sort of concept that the inequality within menstruation is not in isolation. So if you're talking menstrual justice, like you said, you have to talk about intersectional justice. Mm-hmm. And in the report, you talk about how there isn't just sort of menstrual inequality. It's often overlapped with a variety of inequalities, such as economic, environmental, racial, ability. All of these sorts of different disadvantages sort of all come together within the sort of menstrual inequality. And I wanted to ask you, why do you think menstruation is so intertwined? Can you explain it to our audience why menstruation is really intertwined with every sort of other inequality that's there, and why we have to look at it through that frame and not just in isolation? Yeah,
I think the idea of the kind of intersectionality is really around, and this really feeds into iRise's organisational strategies, this idea of sort of collective liberation, no one is free until we're all free. And I think the idea really is that if we focus on access to products, hygiene, wash, education, those things are really, really important, but they don't address the inequalities that people have. So everybody's sort of menstrual experience is unique and individual, dependent on their life experience, essentially, where they're born, the colour of their skin, the family they're born into, their socioeconomic status, where they live, their abilities, disabilities, all of these things. And a menstrual justice approach essentially requires that unless we address racial injustice, we're never going to achieve menstrual justice. Unless we look at climate justice, we're never going to achieve menstrual justice. And it's looking at all of those things in a sort of interconnected way. And I feel like a menstrual justice approach is an opportunity, really, to collaborate. The menstrual justice movement exists, of course, like we're all in it, but it's sort of deeply underfunded, deeply stigmatised, deeply under-recognised. And so part of this as well is sort of positioning menstrual justice as a really powerful catalyst for broader struggles towards sort of gender justice and others more broadly.
Well, that leads us into a really beautiful case study within the report. Perfectly. I can't pick favorites. I mean, I love it all. I live and breathe this, so all of it's amazing. But I will say after the Turkey earthquake, there's a case study in there that sort of approaching the menstrual injustice, or just the access that people needed to sort of menstrual help or help with their menstruation, and that's not just products, like you said, actually ended up being really powerful for sort of helping with the disaster relief for women and children. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so Bahar is a Turkish researcher and kind of menstrual justice activist, and she actually spoke at our global gathering in 2024 when we launched Scarlet Memorations. So it was really amazing to have her there and reflect on her experience, but also what this new framework and menstrual justice sort of definition was bringing to the space. And I think that their work in a humanitarian setting is really, really important. And I think it really shines a light on, the world is changing. We're dealing with sort of polycrises, we're dealing with genocides all over. And I think it's just a really important moment to think about all of the people there that are not having their needs met in many, many ways, but menstrual justice is a really, really key part of that. And I think when we think about the increase of, we can't think about menstrual justice without thinking about climate, because in a simplistic way, the GMC, the Global Menstrual Collective, I sit on their working group for climate, and we've done a really interesting sort of, one of the only pieces that exists really is like a bit of research into what are those intersections. And we had a student working with us over the summer as well, which I can share those pieces of research sort of emerging. But there's kind of so many different facets to it. So it's around like the simplicity of like products. Okay, well, are there accessible products made with local materials, or are we sort of creating loads of waste, and how do we manage that waste from products? But it's also around the impact of things like prolonged heat exposure on individuals when you have climate change, and the way that impacts cycles, but also related conditions, droughts, wash facilities. It's like it's all so interconnected, and until we start looking at it in that way, we're not going to sort of see the progress that we want to see.
No, absolutely. And in the Turkey case study in particular, which I found really interesting, was in the report they were saying that when people were asking for supplies or disaster relief, menstrual supplies were being edited out of those requests. So like on social media or things going online saying we need these. But in response to that, this working group sort of went in and sat down and talked with the women and found a way to really open up with these women through menstruation and the needs that they had. But then this actually spread further, didn't it? It went into sort of reports of any violence they were experiencing or even bigger needs that they needed within the disaster recovery. Did I summarize that all right, Chrissy?
Yeah. I think so.
You obviously, iRise also, you mentioned that you have this sort of network of grassroots organizations in East Africa and with the iRise Institute East Africa. Can you share a little bit more about the work that's been done there? This was also one of your case studies. You mentioned 270 grassroots organizations. What are some of the different projects that are happening within these organizations?
Yeah, so I think the context is important. I suppose that iRise began sort of 14 years ago officially 14 years ago, in Uganda. And now sort of fast forward to 2025, we now are an established organisation here in the UK, and they are a separately registered, Indigenous-led local organisation in Uganda, working across Uganda and East Africa. And I think, we've just spent the last 4 months doing a sort of really in-depth reflective piece as two organisations around like what does menstrual justice mean to us in the context of being these two organisations working in sisterhood, and how do we want it to look, and how do we collectively challenge the structures and systems that exist and kind of perpetuate some of the power imbalances between our two organisations. And that's been really, really interesting and really powerful, I think, for what comes next for us. But yeah, so TPEN, the Period Equality Network, was seeded only in 2021. And it's grown rapidly to now include, yes, it's a network of 270 grassroots organisations across East African countries. And it's really a powerful sort of network for peer learning, for sharing, for best practice, connecting, collective voice, advocacy. So an example would be some of the policy changes that they have advocated for and won across East African nations. And I think, you know, when I went to Uganda, it was kind of the TPEN network is a really valued voice for the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Education. And I think that's really, really important. And we'll come on to some of that a bit later, I think. But the idea that kind of governments are listening to grassroots collectives is really like a huge success. So another great thing about TPEN is it's kind of a testing ground for how we can enact menstrual justice sort of principles. So we're saying that we need to fund grassroots organisations that can't access or don't have the resources to access some of these bigger funding pots. So we're trialling different ways of like through a small grants programme, small pots of money for them to deliver on their own sort of campaigns and programmes and advocacy, but also making sure that that collectively is sort of advancing menstrual justice for the network as well. So yeah, it's really exciting. We've just received some more funding to grow the network over the next couple of years and really sort of showcase as kind of like a blueprint for other regional networks which exist, and sort of calling as a call to action for funders to say like, okay, well, you know, instead of funding, nobody funds menstrual justice work, but when you are funding menstrual justice work, instead of funding sort of like the larger INGOs to deliver work in this way, why not think about doing it in this way instead? Because those grassroots organisations are right in communities and responding to community need in an intersectional way. And, you know, that's really what the menstrual justice approach is really about.
Yeah, I think the report sort of focuses on how sometimes we could really get it wrong, being in the global north and going into the global south and being like, oh, this is what we're going to do. We're going to give you menstrual cups to use without any education about how to use them or access to running clean water, you know, or something like that, for example. Mm-hmm. So supporting the grassroots organizations to help solve problems within their own community, I can imagine, is incredibly powerful and probably a lot more effective. And that you sort of mentioned that, you know, you're trying to get these grants and get funders to sort of look into going for smaller grants or trying to support in smaller ways. And one of the case studies that really stood out to me was such a beautifully simplistic but incredible approach, and that was in the Pacific Islands, the sort of oral storytelling. Do you want to tell the audience a little bit more about what's happening in Pacifica and what was in the case study?
So the Pacific Menstrual Health Network is another regional network for menstrual health, menstrual justice. We're sort of beginning to look at working with them a little bit closer as well, some cross-learning, communities of practice. That's sort of, you know, to be seen. But I think that network, like TPEN, brings together grassroots organisations across the region, activists, and that case study was really showcasing activists and leaders from all of different Pacific Island nations, including male advocates, and speaking about kind of so Indigenous-led oral histories of their experiences of menstrual justice or menstrual realities, I suppose, within their context. And again, just a really powerful way of kind of challenging assumptions and challenging, you know, what people may think that aren't embedded in those communities. And that is just, really, really powerful, and another really great case study within the report.
Well, it's a culture of oral storytelling. Maybe I'm particularly aligned to it being from New Zealand, but it is a traditional oral storytelling culture. So to use that once again, like having been led from the front, not sort of someone coming in and saying, oh, this is a great idea for you, but this really worked within their communities, didn't they? Because they're already got a structure. They have a culture of oral storytelling. So including menstrual justice and menstruation and trying to remove the stigma within that was really effective, and I thought it was really beautiful. Here at the M Scale, we make little to no money, so it brings us a huge amount of joy to share this message from our sponsors. Stay tuned.
Going through puberty is such an unsettling time, and with girls experiencing their periods earlier and earlier, trusted and age-appropriate information is essential. That's where Ovecare comes in. They've designed a period app for our young people without adult themes such as fertility and sexuality, and all the support they could need for curious minds. We'll be talking to Libby, the founder of Ove, on a later episode of M-Talk, but for now it's available to download on Android and iOS for parents to help guide their young ones through these changes. You can find a link in the episode notes.
So now the Memorations. The concept of the report being that all of these grassroots organizations and bigger NGOs and governments, they're all sort of working towards reducing menstruation stigma and this concept of menstrual justice. And it's really beautiful, and that's why you have this sort of symbolism of starlings, for example, doing murmuring together. Is murmuring the verb? I guess. But what are some of the limitations within the current movement that you've seen, or that was also in the report? Can you share sort of not the concerns, but what the limitations are within the murmur, so to speak?
I think the movement is generally limited, in terms of funding. I think that's just a huge issue. There's so little funding going to grassroots organisations. There's so little funding going for kind of gender justice work. And there's even less dedicated for menstrual justice. And I think that's why the framework is around sort of positioning menstruation as such a catalyst for other justice struggles, because it's kind of like you can't get there without looking at this. I think a lot of the work that iRise is going to be trying to do over the next couple of years, of course, mentioning TPEN and the small grants programme and sort of modelling how to redistribute resource and put more funding into that space. But also some of the work we'll be doing as a UK-based organisation that has access to London and where those donors are, is kind of doing a bit of education around that as well. So like, okay, donor X, you fund gender justice. So why have you never funded anything to do with menstrual justice? Donor 2, you fund climate, but you've never even thought about funding anything to do with menstruation. So I think that's where we see our levers of change as an organisation, and the positionality that we have here is it's starting to do some of that work around the recommendations in the report for donors going out and really actually trying to do some of that work. We're really lucky that one of our funders has been with us, for the last decade and really invests in our position to do that. And, one of very few funders who are interested in funding this work, and with a movement building lens as well. So that's one of the key limitations, I suppose, for the movement. And, it's that sort of narrow framing. I think the stigmatisation still is huge. It's a huge barrier, obviously, to menstrual justice, but it's a huge barrier for people working in this space. I find that in my personal life all the time, just kind of, oh, what's your job? And, I work for a menstrual justice charity. And they're like, oh, what's that? And then you tell them and they're like, well, why do you need that? And it's, it's like so much work to do, even to just get on the same page about having a conversation.
I do have to say, even when I first started doing the M scale, and I sort of was, I actually took with this from one of your reports, was like 86% of responders had felt anxiety around managing their periods outside of the home and being worried about access to clean water or a bin or anything like that. And so when I started talking to people about it, I would say, because of period anxiety. And I was speaking to people who menstruate, and they'd be like, what's period anxiety? And I'd be like, that extra worry that we have when we're leaving the house, when you got your period, or the deciding whether you're going to buy fresh vegetables or tampons this week, or, all of these little things that kind of feed into your anxiety you have around your period every month. And there's always like this light bulb moment of like, oh gosh, I guess I do experience that. I guess I do, like having a leak is like the worst possible thing that could ever happen to me. I'd be so mortified or, like all of this. So I definitely understand what you mean by it's so much to even get people to the table, in a sense, to realize that this is a movement and this is a problem and people are trying to fix it justifiably. With that, you mentioned that grassroots organisations are having an impact on governments and that governments are starting to address this. In your dream world, if everything, if everything was how we would like it to be, how would governments begin to address these challenges? What would you say? Obviously, it has to be quite nuanced per region, but if looking at the UK, for example, what would you like to see?
So we do, this is a piece of work for us at the moment, and I suppose I could use that as a case study. So the UK government has a period equity scheme. It has a commitment to period equity. A specific part of that is the period product scheme in schools. So every school across the country should have access to period products for their learners to access in school. But I mean, the Every Period Counts campaign, we collected hundreds of stories from young people where they were just like, we can't access those products. We don't know where they are. They're gate-kept by staff in cupboards. We have to ask for them, all of these things. And something that kept coming up again and again and again is, well, we don't even have access to toilets at school. So how are we supposed to access products? But how are we also supposed to change our products and have good menstrual health and all of these things? So that led us to do a piece of work last year where we brought together young people, teachers, sector allies to come up with a toilet policy toolkit for schools. So looking at the issues that teachers are facing, which are, well, we are so overburdened generally trying to sort of deliver within schools, but we also have huge concerns about toilet spaces, essentially. So bullying, vaping, sexual behaviour, and matching, sort of balancing that against the needs of students. And many students were saying, well, our toilets are locked all day, every day. We cannot use the toilet at school, which is obviously like a huge human rights issue. Yeah. So we brought them together to kind of say, okay, well, where's the middle ground here? And out of that came the Toilet Policy Toolkit, which we are now piloting alongside a primary curriculum in schools in the UK. And the idea is that with that, we're supporting schools. It's a government issue really to do this, but we're supporting schools to better implement the period product scheme so that it actually works for young people. But we want governments to sort of, it's not enough to say, here's the policy, here's what we're sort of supposedly doing. They need to make sure that schools are supported to implement it. They need to have guidance, they need to have resources, they need to have multi-year commitments, which is always the same thing we say about funding. Yeah. And also just like conduct evaluations, like, is it working, what's not working? And a lot of our work in the UK is really trying to hold the government to account on that, ensuring that youth voice is at the centre of that. And now at the moment, trying to support schools and from that, creating national guidance that hopefully will be taken on board. But that's kind of what we're trying to do here in the UK. But I think, as you've mentioned, it's different in every different place. But I think the menstrual justice approach would be listen to, what menstruators need, take evidence that exists, conduct research, and have an intersectional approach. It's not, the period product scheme is great, but it doesn't respond to all of the realities and needs that schools are facing. So, and I think, our partners in East Africa would say, actually, we really need to be thinking about embedding menstrual justice policies and within all of the other. It's not good enough to have a standalone policy. We need to think about it in the context of climate change, in the context of our health systems, our education systems. And that's probably really what we'd like to be seeing.
It's time for Women's Health News. Here, we're going to bring you some of the latest developments around the world that maybe you missed in the everyday newspapers. Stay tuned. Today in Positive Health News, global health experts are taking new steps to save mothers' lives. The World Health Organization and partner agencies have released new recommendations to prevent deaths from postpartum hemorrhage, which remains one of the leading causes of maternal death worldwide. The guidelines focus on improving access to effective treatments, training healthcare workers, and ensuring essential medicines are available in all maternity facilities. The WHO says the goal is to make childbirth safer for every mother, no matter where she lives. Moving to Egypt, a presidential health drive has reached 70 million women with free medical screenings. Called the Egyptian Presidential Initiative for Supporting Women's Health, the campaign now operates across 3,163 health units and 102 hospitals, providing services from tumour detection to monitoring diabetes, blood pressure and weight. Health officials say over 1 million women have undergone advanced examinations in referral hospitals and that 35,000 breast cancer cases have been registered under the program so far, all receiving free treatment. The initiative also includes mobile units reaching remote areas and has trained over 30,000 health personnel while handling more than 30,000 hotline inquiries. Ministry experts urge women nationwide to take advantage of ongoing free screenings, underlining early detection as key to saving lives. I wanted to go off what you were saying about the UK government. I always say the tampon tax policy always was like half a policy, because they took the tax off, but they didn't put any limitations into sort of corporations just eating up their extra money. So what happened is they took that off tampons and then they just charged more for tampons. Like they just took the VAT, basically, all of the sort of on sellers. And I guess that's a bit what you're saying about they did the policy, but it feels like it's only ever halfway. The framework and the actual systems to implement it properly are never really thought through. So I imagine the work that you're doing at iRise is really, really important, because there's not much to it. If they sign over a policy or they decide to do something because it looks good and they're getting a lot of pressure, but then it doesn't actually work, we're nowhere closer to sort of solving some of these issues, are we? Is there anything that you would like our listeners to know in the context of Scarlet Memorations or the menstrual justice movement in general? Anything that we haven't touched upon in this conversation so far?
I think just to say that the report is there. It is quite long, but there's also an executive summary which really pulls out kind of like the key headlines. And as I said, we never wanted that to be a standalone report, even though it's beautiful and all of those things. And our work really now is to take that thinking and really start to kind of operationalize it. So over the next couple of years, we'll be working on a new sort of area of work, which is working with like a regional network like TPEN or the Pacific, an INGO, a funder, and saying, okay, well, like this is the framework. How does that apply to you? And kind of creating open source training, essentially, that can be shared, so that when people say, okay, like I get this, but I don't know how to embed it into my practice or the work that I'm doing. So that's what we're going to be working on over the next couple of years. We're also going to be doing some of that donor education that we were speaking about earlier. So funders that are kind of shouting about the work they're doing in gender, climate, disability, racial justice. Okay, well, like maybe you could embed a menstrual justice lens within the work that you're doing. We're really excited about that. We're also going to be doing a campaign, because I think the idea of like, what does menstrual justice mean to you it is challenging. Like it's not a fully formed thing, right? Because it means different things to different people depending on your context and your positionality. So we'll be sort of looking at a campaign of, well, what does menstrual justice mean to you? And we just started that with our youth board when they had a retreat a couple of weeks ago, and we sat them down and we got them to sort of share that, and the content that they shared and their perspectives were just so rich, and we'll be going and doing that as well. And then, I think watch out for us as we join forces with TPEN and other regional networks and sort of get this thinking in global spaces. We really want to kind of share it far and wide and let people take it with them and take it in the way that they want to take it. So, it's really exciting to be ready to sort of take the report and see where we can go.
It is. It's really exciting. And the report itself actually gives a lot of hope, especially, I have a lot of, so not colleagues, but people that I know who work in this space in the entrepreneur space or the social entrepreneurship or even just advocacy. A lot of the time we're sort of like, oh gosh, trying to get people to change their minds about this is like banging your head against the wall. It is so disheartening sometimes. You feel like you're making no progress and you're putting so much work in. And so I actually really found that Scarlet Memorations gave a lot of hope of like, actually look, if you look at this on a global scale, look at all these incredible movements that are happening and that things are progressing and the conversation is getting louder and more people are getting involved. And it was really heartwarming to see. So I want to thank you for your time, and I want to finish on a piece that comes from the report itself. So I got this little quote here, and it says, Like the breathtaking murmuration of starlings, when we move together with purpose and synchronicity, we create something beautiful, powerful, and transformative. May this report serve as a call to action to take flight and join the flock, applying a rights-based and intersectional lens to our work and advance global menstrual justice for all. Thank you, Chrissy. Thank you for breaking it down for us. Thank you for your time, and thank you for all the work that you do. It's truly, truly meaningful. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
We wanted to highlight some of the cases within the report because they truly paint a beautiful picture of the grassroots activism that is occurring around the world as spoken about. So, for example, in Namibia, activist Munukayomwa Mimi Elise Muya is trying to walk the fine line between tradition, culture, and menstrual justice. In Namibia, when a girl gets her period, she undergoes a coming-of-age ritual called Sikenge, which is often coupled with 3 months of isolation, making the experience even more harrowing. Munu Kayombo's work is balancing the honouring of cultural heritage whilst fighting against practices that violate bodily autonomy and educational rights. She is doing this through policy change, education, and advocacy. Meanwhile, in East Africa, where girls can miss 20% of their schooling because of their period, some of the grassroots organisations in TPEN have managed to change policy in their nation. For example, working with local schools to educate, remove stigma, and distribute reusable period products with information on how to use them. These are some examples of the work that menstrual justice groups are doing around the world, with very little funding.
Well, there we have it, folks. It is so inspiring to hear all about the incredible work that iRise and these grassroots organisations are doing around the world to improve period poverty and stigma. If you've enjoyed this episode and you'd like to know more about the work iRise are doing, you can head to our website and find our episode notes, resources, and of course, a link to the Scarlet Memorations report. You'll find that at themscale.com. Thank you so much for tuning in. Your support is what keeps us going, so please do like, subscribe, and share or anything you can to spread the word of our little period podcast. Until next time, ciao.